So I discovered Alan Watts on YouTube, and I listened to a lot of his audio lectures. Alan Watts is like deep, like really, really deep. Is he from the 60s or 70s? So he's like hippies, counterculture, beatnik type thing. Yeah, the beatniks were really into spirituality. A lot of them used things like drugs to explore spirituality, like psychedelics. But there was some real poetry. They read Taoism and Buddhism. And he represents kind of the intellectual wing of that, like someone who really systematized it and kind of synthesized it. So Alan Watts is wonderful. Like I remember hearing a whole lecture of his about Taoism, and I think he's right on. I studied Taoism on my own before listening to Alan Watts, and I love the way he talks about it. Yeah, he makes it really, he clears up some misconceptions and really just lays it forth very practically and relevant to our time. So I don't think he's a charlatan or a, you know what I mean? I don't think he's a amateur or some sort of like charlatan or con man. I think he's really got some rigor and some insight, you know? And it's primarily, from what I can tell, primarily Eastern emphasis more than Western. But he probably published a lot and spoke a lot. So I don't know, maybe he talks about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all these people. So, hey, let's investigate together. If you have more questions, just ask me or shoot me an email, and we can continue from there. But yeah, I love Alan Watts. Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's kind of like a liaison, right? He's representing East and then sharing it here and kind of trying to get people to see why it's important and things like that. Yeah, certainly Buddhism changed my life. Taoism changed it again. Taoism plus Buddhism changed it again when I discovered Zen Buddhism. You should check out on YouTube someone called Leo Gura. Leo Gura, look for actualized.org. He's a practicing Buddhist, and he synthesizes a lot of the East and Western traditions. And he's very practical on things like mindfulness, meditation. Yeah, Leo, and then Gura. Yeah, it's just something to explore, you know, someone who really, I don't know how much of an academic or professional he is. I don't know how amateur he is. All I know is that when I listen to him, I'm absorbed into his intensity, and I can tell that as far as practice, he knows what he's doing. His theory is pretty good too, you know, but he'll take you to some levels that some people might consider cultish, you know. He has a cult, you know how you can build an online following, right? So if you're an influencer or something like that, and you start giving people advice like, you are God, I am God, we are all God, and you've got a bunch of fanatics following you, you can seem a bit cultish, you know? Hey. All right, 6:35, guys. Yay, we start on time. So how's it going? Okay, please do. Please do. I'll give you a second. So it sounds like things are going good in terms of our remote brothers and sisters. I got feedback from them. And I also was able to see on Zoom how many participants there were synchronously. We had about 10 last time, no complaints, no major complaints. So it seems like even if you guys can't attend, you can always join synchronously. There's no passwords, it's automatic. You just click join a meeting, you know what I mean? And you just come on. So it's pretty easy. The complaints about audio quality have gone down. So things are getting better. I'm getting used to staying in one place instead of running around like a chicken with its head cut off. All right, guys. Ooh, mask makes my glasses more slippery. Okay, so here we are, guys. Finally, we're going to get to see some of my notes that are going to situate and expand some of the basic topics we were talking about. We're still on the introduction in week number 2, but trust me, if I want to accelerate, I can accelerate. I care more about you being motivated and inspired, because if I motivate and inspire you, you'll care more about the material. Why bore you with a bunch of technical details that you don't care about? I'd rather spend a lot of time making sure you find it relevant and inspiring and intimate. I'd rather spend a lot of time doing that so that when we hit the technical stuff, you'll see why the technical stuff matters. Does that make sense? All right, guys. First things first. There are 2 readings you're supposed to do each week. Is that your understanding? One of those readings is from a textbook. Has anyone got the textbook yet? Raise your hand. All right, great. So in case you can't get the textbook or you forget it at home or something, some students asked me to try and find some PDFs. So I looked for PDFs online, and I found PDFs, and I posted them on Blackboard for the first 2 weeks. Last week was The Value of Philosophy, Bertrand Russell. And this week is Plato's Apology, featuring Plato's master, Socrates. I've posted both of those. So they're available now on Blackboard. And I found 3 more for the 3 coming weeks. And let's hope that I can find for every single week of the course, so that, you know, if something comes up, you can always refer to them. I can't guarantee their quality or things like that, but I overlook them and make sure they look all right. And then, you know, we work from there, okay? So those are available on Blackboard. Are you guys familiar with Blackboard? No problems finding all the documents, all the videos, all the whatever, syllabus? Everything good? Okay. All right, guys. I hope you're still doing your daily symptom checker, and I hope that you check your seats before you come every class. Okay. Anyone know who we're covering today? Before we get to the notes, who was the reading for today? Go ahead. Yeah, Plato. What was the name of the book? The Apology. What is an apology? If someone's apologizing, what are they doing? Yeah. Yeah, that's the most common use of the word apologize now. I'm sorry, my bad, I was wrong. I apologize. Lo siento. But that is not the meaning of apology in the context of Plato's apology. There, you have his master, Socrates. Did you read it? Is he apologizing in the modern sense of apologizing? It's the opposite, right? Instead of apologizing, he's doing what? Instead of saying, I'm sorry, what is he doing? Okay, I'll help you out. Here's what he's doing. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, my bad, I won't do it again, or I regret doing it, he's saying, I'm defending myself. I apologize means I'm defending myself. I'm going to offer a defense of what I did. I was justified in doing what I did. What I did was not wrong. I do not apologize in the modern sense. I'm going to tell you why what I did was actually the right thing to do. All right? So that's what we're going to cover today. The broad theme for last class was the meaning and value of philosophy. And I hope that did going through Russell help you understand what philosophy is all about and why it matters? I hope it did. Did it? Last time? Good. All right, now we're going to switch. We're doing philosophy about philosophy. We're philosophizing about philosophy and trying to figure out what it is. So we have some idea of its meaning and value and its relevance, but now we're going to really zoom in to someone I think is the the absolute gold standard for philosophy, the quintessential, perfect embodiment of philosophy, a philosopher's philosopher, right? This is Socrates. Why do I say that? It's because with Socrates, you get something more than someone who publishes technical papers that get published in peer-reviewed journals. You get someone who cares about the souls of his fellow countrymen. Socrates is an Athenian, and he cares about the virtue and the excellence and the spirituality and the soulfulness of his fellow Athenians. When he looks around, he sees them a kind of mediocre, kind of complacent, and kind of distracted by money, distracted by power. So today's theme, last theme was the value and meaning of philosophy, but today's theme is the cultural mission, vocation, and function of philosophy. Now we're going to go deep, because I suggest to you that in Socrates, we're not going to just find a talker, a fast talker, which he might look like in the dialogues. Rather, we're going to find the Greek analog of someone who's going to sacrifice his life to save his countrymen. Do you know this analog I'm referring to? Who is the Jewish analog of that? Jesus Christ, exactly. I think they are equivalent. They're both on a mission to save souls. They just do it in different ways. I hope you're excited about that. But before I get there, you know, I always like to spend a little time really getting deep. And I have a little notes here to really help you think a little deeper about what we're talking about here. Guys, I am so interested in you guys caring about philosophy. I think you've already picked up on that, huh? So every day I'm going to try and have in addition to the notes that I have, I just want to spend a little time inspiring you and make sure you really see the importance, the relevance, and the reason why you should care about what we're talking about. First question that you should think about: are you here in this world for a reason or a purpose? And does that matter? If your existence here is an accident, you can see why that might have implications for how you might feel and evaluate and value your life and whether your life might be worth living. If you are just a bunch of environmental contingencies that shaped how the mechanism of natural selection selected certain genes to be passed on through heredity to future generations so that they adapted to this environment and gave you the anatomy and physiology that you have. If you're nothing but a physical body with fancy electrochemical and biochemical equipment, if that's all you are, is a skeleton with meat on it that has the capacity to manipulate other things with its hands and use its brain to figure things out, that might be kind of deflationary. You can see why, right? You might be like, damn, is that all I am? One big accident? One big lump of carbon and hydrogen and a little bit of oxygen? A fancy DNA molecule that has an interesting phenotype. That's about it. Or, on the other hand, like we said, as religions teach us, are you something more like a masterpiece, the center of the entire universe? And the dramas of your life are the most existential dramas, the most meaningful dramas in the entire universe. I want you to think about that. Are you here for no reason? Or are you here for the ultimate reason? Are you exactly where you're supposed to be right now? No accidents, no nothing. You're exactly dead center at the exact place you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be anywhere else. Think about that. And also start to think about what kinds of things, what kinds of activities would make you become more and more conscious of the fact that you have a purpose and a reason for being here. All right. That's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing, we talked about this thing called the soul or a mind. And we said just like God is metaphysical because he's invisible, we see the world appears, but we're not sure if God appears. So also I see your body appears, but it's going to be debatable, tricky whether also your mind appears, right? We're going to get into that later. But the thing I want to bring up right now is since both God and your soul or your mind are invisible and metaphysical, then the real you, whatever is the real you, has implications. If the real you is your body, and your body is going to disintegrate one day, then the end of your body is the end of you, right? If you are your body. But if death has nothing to do with the end of your body, if you're not essentially your body, you're essentially your mind or something metaphysical, then the end of the physical, does that imply the end of you? You see why it's relevant? You see why metaphysics is relevant? So this thing called death might not be as menacing as it sounds. That person lying on their deathbed might be going somewhere else, an afterlife. They might persist in an invisible form, I don't know, in a form of energy, in some sort of reincarnation, right? Those are religious beliefs. Those religious beliefs might sound wacky and paranormal and kind of spooky given our scientific habits, but I want to suggest to you that philosophy keeps us open-minded and receptive, right? Always double-checking ourselves. No dogmas. All right. So if it's the soul that identifies the person, and then maybe you should care more about what's essentially you than what's accidentally you. Do you see what I'm saying? Your body is only accidentally you. You just happen to be in a particular body, and you're going to cycle through many more bodies if reincarnation is true, and metamorphosis, right? The body isn't really you. You're just occupying a house for a while, and you'll change residence again and again and again. But the real you, the person, if that's identical to the soul, well, then maybe you should spend more time cultivating your soul, exercising your mental faculties, your intellect, your capacity to love, things like faith and hope. I want to suggest to you that love, faith, hope, those are all activities not of the body, but of the soul. Wisdom is an activity of the soul, a confession of the soul. Truth is a confession of the soul. Science will try to tell you that truth is more something you establish using delicate instruments and you report what the instrument is saying. But I want to say to you, the deepest truths are kind of like confessions. If you read good poetry, there are no instruments coming from that. You see what I mean? That's someone confessing some truth, coming from experience and things like that. All right. Next, so your soul might have the real dignity and the real value, and your body might have some value, but it's relative value, not absolute value. And maybe you should reserve most of your value and your energy and your care for what's really valuable, that is the soul. And I think that's what Christ and Buddha and Socrates are trying to tell us, right? What does Christ say? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose what? Lose his soul. All right, guys. I hope you're getting the point. Philosophy is still relevant today. The next thing I want you to start thinking about, and this is really, these questions I'm asking you are not idle. They're going to help you with your papers. Because I'm going to ask you these kinds of questions to answer on your papers. So really, I'm just provoking you right now to start caring and feeling tension and feeling a little anxiety so that you'll spill it out on your paper. And then after you've dumped your heart on your paper, you use your head to organize it and impress me so I can give you that A you deserve. All right, next. What do you really care about? What are you passionate about? Think about that. Remember I was talking about your reason and purpose for existing? Some philosophers say the only thing that can give life meaning is if you fill your life up with your passion. Find what you're passionate about and absorb yourself in it. That's what Steve Jobs did. He was a workaholic, right? What do you think Elon Musk does day in and day out? Who is Bill Gates? Let's get reacquainted with Warren Buffett. Okay? You see where I'm going with that, right? And these are just businessmen. What about artists? What about scientists? What about philosophers? What about those kindergarten teachers? What about policemen, firemen? You get my drift, right? Some of these people are extremely happy being janitors. Doesn't matter about social status. They got food on the table and faith in God, and they're done. They're good. You see my point? I just want you to think, guys, this word ministry might be associated a lot with religion or with government, but I want to say to you, you have the capacity to have a ministry of your own. And maybe, just maybe, if you start having an intimate relationship with something metaphysical, you might discover your calling, your vocation, and you might have a ministry. Your ministry might not be something in a temple or a congregation. Your ministry could even be something like this, where you don't really talk about deities or divinities or anything. There's no praise and worship, but you can feel the care. See what I'm saying? Customer service, professionalism, all these things involve care. You see what I'm saying? All right. This society we're in, we use the word society in sociology. We talk about society as if it's just one monolithic thing. We live in society. Our society is culture. But I just want to suggest to you that if you start studying history, society is not monolithic. In this country, because of its history, we have separation of church and state. But if you go back in history, and even now in many countries, church and state are not separate. Society is not just monolithic, it's stratified and organized. If you go back before the American Revolution and the French Revolution, you go back to Europe and you go to India. In India, you have what? What system? The caste system. That's not regular monolithic society, that's stratified. And if you go back before the French Revolution, what did you have? Do you know? In Europe, what kind of organization of society? Was everyone equal? What was at top? The king. There were 3 levels of society. Just like there were castes in India, and someone was on top. Also in Europe, there was someone on top in Christendom. Who was on top during Christendom? During Europe's long process of becoming Christian? The Pope and the clergy, exactly. They used to call the level you're at in Europe, that was your station. There were 3 different stations. The highest station was what you said, the clergy, with the Pope as the head. Think about that, guys. Why do we raise up precisely the clergy? A bunch of people who lead us in rituals and ceremonies and sacraments. Why do we ennoble them? Why do we say, you are the first estate, the highest estate? Kind of like those Brahmins in the caste system. Why would you do that? Why would all of society willingly give over their power and their care to a bunch of priests? Can you think of a reason why? especially if your culture is religious and Christian. Why would you do that? These questions I'm asking you guys, I want to suggest to you they're far more important than learning logic because they're more humanistic. Do you see what I'm saying? You're beginning to empathize with human history and some of the figures in history, and you're beginning to see things differently based on your capacity to recalibrate yourself and not just talk about society. This society we're in is a specific type of society. It's called civil society. In this society we're in, we're a bunch of citizens who are called civilians. We're civilians, and so that's why this is called civil society. But there are at least two other branches I can think of society that we don't see every day, that aren't fully integrated into civil society. After the French Revolution, they were kind of disassembled. But in this country, we still have them. It's just that we have separation of state from these two bodies. But these bodies are hierarchical and primarily patriarchal as well. Can you think of the two institutions I'm talking about other than civil society? So we've got civil society, which has a bunch of, after the Industrial Revolution, we have a bunch of workers, blue collar, white collar, you name it. All sorts of professionals, people engaging in industry and commerce. That's what mostly civil society is. You guys are getting degrees so you can go and get jobs and contribute to the economy. But there are at least two other branches of society where things are not so free. There's a lot of discipline and there's a lot of order, hierarchies. Can you think of what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yes, the church and what's the other one? The church is one hierarchy that we have in society that we don't see all the time. Most of the time we see students, yeah. Yes, very good. The military and the church. Guys, we shouldn't take this lightly. You know what I mean? We refer to ourselves as society, and we do sociology of this society. Rates of marriage, rates of divorce, rates of teenage pregnancy, rates of rape, rates of criminology. You see what I'm saying? But we're only studying one specific type of society that is no longer integrated into the first, second, and third estate. You see where I'm going? We've lost our sense of aristocracy, rule by the best. In a Christendom, in a Christian culture, who are the best people? Well, it's the ones who have dedicated themselves to God, right? Can you see why the first estate was a bunch of priests before the French Revolution? Yes. Now we're talking about aristocratic society, which has hierarchies. So the priests were first, because since God is all-powerful, he deserves all glory. We need to focus on him, give our best resources to him, put him first, put God on the throne, then put his servants next to him. Then under that, yes, we need defense. So we do need to put defense above everything else, right? So we put our warriors or our military second, and then last comes now what we are, civil society. You see that? The logic of our current climate is very democratic, not aristocratic. So we feel like it's an injustice if there are stations or estates above us. We feel that to be unequal, undemocratic, and unfair. I just want to educate you so that you see things very differently if you study history. Do you see why that's important? You can begin to sympathize more with religious institutions. You can begin to sympathize more with military institutions. And you can begin to understand certain periods in history, like the feudal period and the medieval period and the Middle Ages better. And if you understand that better, well, then it'll be much easier to understand Israel, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, which are the environments philosophy began in. Very aristocratic. You see why it's important to do history? Guys, I want you to understand something. Philosophy is very scientific in certain aspects, but it's also very religious in aspects. But guess what it is constantly in all aspects? It's very human. You see that? So I'm trying to humanize philosophy so that you see it's relevant in all aspects of life, in the more scientific side, in the more religious side, and even history is relevant to philosophy, because by being disciplined in history and understanding it properly, you will calibrate yourself to have refined taste and refined judgment. You won't dismiss the religious institution as a bunch of people who make shit up or are con men or are just oppressive because they have Sharia law or Mosaic law or something like that. You won't have that vulgar reaction to them. Instead, with an open mind, you'll be more receptive. Doesn't mean you'll become religious, but you will have more refinement, more taste, you'll be more civilized, and you'll be better appreciative of all the history we have that led to this moment. All right, we're almost done, guys. I want to suggest to you that religious history, Buddha, Krishna, Christ, Lao Tzu, Confucius, all these people were great. But why were they great? They were great, and the reason why religion spreads faster than military or other institutions is because these people cared about other people. And not only did they care about other people, but they cared about what other people cared about. Remember I told you that little story of how you go through life and you start accumulating cares and they become burdens? Well, all of these people, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Socrates, they cared about what other people cared about. They cared about the fact that someone has a disease and is suffering. They cared about the fact that someone has a child who they don't know how to raise. They cared about the fact that someone is in a civil war. And so they empathize and they bear that burden, and they give that person some relief from the burden they bear. So that's why those people are great even now. And I want to suggest to you that philosophy also offers an opportunity to do that. In the history of humanity, we have two big forces that sometimes clash. And I think you can already see that. One is reason. And what does reason come in conflict with? Faith, right? Reason or faith. Should I live by reason or should I live by faith? Well, let's think about that burden I was telling you about. How does faith help you bear that burden? Anyone want to try? How does living a life of faith take away your burdens and lessen them? You've got all these cares, all these worries, all these anxieties, things aren't working out, your life seems stagnant. How does faith relieve you of those burdens? What's the logic? Yep?
Yes, it's that you believe in something higher than transcends like nature.
Exactly. You believe something higher that's more powerful than you, and then you take your burden and you do what? You give it over to that higher power. And you feel free psychologically, right? Because you're like, hey, I'm a free man. I'm liberated. I'm delivered. I'm redeemed. Those kinds of words, right? Because I'm not bearing my burdens all on my own. By myself, they would be too much. But if I give them over in a psychological act of repentance and salvation, then you're not fighting your wars on your own. You're like, look, I don't know if I'm going to get the promotion. I don't know if I'm going to get good grades. I don't know. There could be a hurricane. There could be COVID, anything. Am I really going to spend time worrying about all of that and caring? I know someone who cares about me more than I care about myself. I know someone I can give these burdens to, and I'll be relieved. I'll experience bliss or nirvana or redemption. Do you guys get the point? Religion offers faith as a means of bearing the burden. But I want to suggest to you that philosophy does too. Sometimes by faith, by being a passionate believer. People like Pascal and Kierkegaard were philosophers, but they were also super, super Christians, just like Newton was, and Copernicus, and Faraday. But I want to suggest to you that there is another way. Reason also helps you bear the burden, but in a different way. How does reason help you bear the burden differently from faith? Any ideas? Yes. Yes, absolutely. By mastering nature. They say knowledge is power, right? Think about that. Knowledge is power. That's very true in many ways, right? We didn't get the cure to polio from religion. We didn't get the cure to measles from religion. Are you guys getting my point? It was by studying nature and mastering it through reason and experience and observation and measurement. Look at all the leaps we took in biology by discovering cells and by switching from the idea that we spontaneously get diseases from like ghosts or whatever to the idea that many of our diseases come from germs, microbes, microorganisms. You observe the microorganism, you observe how it infects a system, and you have an idea of how you might control it. You see that? Medicine is a form of technology. You can manipulate economies. You can control politics. You get the idea? Reason also can help you bear the burden of life by controlling things. And also by feeling at peace that at least you understand them. Does that make sense? So you bear the burdens by first understanding them and then by figuring out ways to mitigate them or eliminate them totally. Guys, November 3rd is coming up. I think you should care about it. I think you should really think deeply about what values you have and let them be reflected in your vote. I encourage you to vote. I got a letter in the mail today. I'm already registered to vote, and so I'm going to get a mail-in ballot, and I'm definitely going to vote by ballot, by mail-in ballot, and I encourage you to do the same and participate in our democratic republic. All right, guys, you ready to do some philosophy? Good. Who do we study for today? Who is it? Plato. Do you have any idea who Plato was? Who is Plato? Huh? Yes, he's a Greek philosopher. Excellent. That's all I wanted to know. So he's a Greek philosopher. He was the student of probably the most famous philosopher, at least in Western history, and that's Socrates. So remember I gave you a little background story about the 7 sages and how we made the transition into more philosophical, metaphysical stuff when we hit one of the 7 sages called Thales. Do you remember that? Okay. So for a while, we had ethical activity, people giving practical wisdom advice. That was the 7 sages. They were very ethical. They were ethicists or moralists. And then for a while, we had all this wild speculation. We had people saying, oh my God, the world is made out of water. And then Thales had a disciple called Anaximander who said, no, it's not made out of water. It's made out of something indefinite. Let's not define it. It's so flexible that it has no definition. So it can define itself however it wants. It can take any particular physical form, and then it loses that form later. And then he had another, that Anaximander had another disciple who said, no. The indefinite is too indefinite. Let's go back to something physical we know, something that appears, but something that's more flexible than water. And he said, voila, air. Everything is made out of air. And it goes on and on and on. We had Heraclitus who just said, no. The whole world is nothing but a bunch of changing, fluctuating appearances. There is no permanence in nature. There are no beings. Everything is in fluctuation. Everything is becoming. Then we had someone else who said, no, 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 I am Parmenides. And I say, yes, Heraclitus, you're right. Our senses deceive us, but our senses don't deceive us that everything is static and has being and permanence. It's the other way around. Our senses deceive us that everything is changing. In reality, nothing changes. All this change we see in the world for Parmenides is an illusion. It's the senses deceiving us. But we can use reason to figure out that multiplicity and change involves contradictions and therefore can't be real or true. So reality can't be a bunch of becoming and changing and multiplicity. Reality must be static and permanent and one. And with Parmenides, we have the birth of monism and ontology. What kind of thing exists? Only one homogeneous spherical being. That's it. Everything else is an illusion. Nothing changes about this being. There's not multiple versions of this being. It's monist. Just like we have monotheism, well, this is a mono being, mono-ontology. Only one being. Is it material? Is it mental? He didn't really specify. Maybe he did, but we've lost a lot of his work, so we don't know. And it goes on and on and on, guys. Some people say, oh, there's a mind that created everything, or everything is made out of earth, air, fire, and water. They didn't have, sophisticated chemistry back then. And it goes on and on and on. I won't bore you with the details. The important point is, ethics had a high point in Greece. Then metaphysics came up. Then metaphysics went down, and with Socrates, he brought ethics back. But now this time with a fierce religious zeal. Socrates, as you might have read in the work I had you see, is a very charismatic figure. He lived in the classical age of Athens. When we say classical age, what do you associate with that? The classical age of Greece, the classical age of Athens. What's going on during this classical age? What's the cultural environment of the classical age of Athens and Greece? I'll give you a hint. What was going on in the 1500s in Florence and Venice and Rome? What event was going on culturally? The Renaissance. So, what was going on during the Renaissance? What were Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo all up to? What were they up to? What kind of cultural activities? Absolutely, man. That's right. In Italy primarily, but also throughout the northern European countries, you have a renaissance, which means what? What is a renaissance? A rebirth of what? The arts and the sciences, philosophy. Here's what's going on, guys. There was a renaissance, and some people associate that renaissance with the beginning of the modern world. Why? Because of what I told you on the very first day of class. The modern world, one way to define it is by the decline of the authority of the church and the rise of the authority of what? Science, good. So what happened during the Renaissance, it's not so much that people became completely secular and irreligious. That would be an exaggeration. But what they did do is they discovered, oh, wait a minute. For the past 1,000 years, all we've been doing is worshiping Jehovah and Yahweh and Jesus, and we've absorbed ourselves in Jewish and Christian theology and religion. But we ignored a whole bunch of aspects of what it is to be human that the pagans from Greco-Roman ancient times had preserved and cultivated. So it's called a Renaissance because it's a rebirth of Greco-Roman antiquity. The Jewish and Christian culture had triumphed in Christendom. First, under an emperor called Constantine. Constantine made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire. He made it legal and he encouraged it. He did not make it mandatory. It wasn't until a few decades later that another emperor called Theodosius actually made it not only permittable or permitted, but said, no, 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 no. It's not just that you can be a Christian, but you what? You must be a Christian. And then finally, about 400 years later, we have Charlemagne, who not only becomes kind of like the new emperor of Western Europe, but he unifies Christendom. The Pope gives him the status of Holy Roman Emperor, and he becomes the new Catholic ruler along with the Pope. Do you see what's going on? So for a while, Jewish and Christian, Judeo-Christian values, Judeo-Christian culture came to dominate all the French and German tribes and the English tribes, the Anglo-Saxons, all of them. They dominated them. And they were Christianized slowly while they were losing their belief, their pagan beliefs in Thor and the Eddas and, all these other gods. Make sense? And that lasted for about 1,000 years. But then somewhere in the 1400s and 1300s, scholars like Petrarch and Dante and Boccaccio, they started discovering literary texts. And they're like, oh my God, Latin is beautiful. Not just beautiful for doing Mass in Catholic Church, but beautiful for exploring human experience. Petrarch discovered an ancient Roman philosopher and statesman called Cicero, fell in love, started writing poetry himself, brilliant essays and prose. His spirit spread among his countrymen, and soon enough, people were cultivating and practicing these non-religious aspects of what it is to be human. And that's the birth of what we call humanism. You've heard of humanism? That's secular humanism. And that's what's going on that's kind of undermining the authority of the church. You see what's going on? Because the authority of the church was rested on the idea that a man's soul should be fully absorbed in God and maybe love of neighbor too, as the second commandment. But now you've got all people saying, wait a minute, let's take a step back. Let's look at the human being from different angles and perspectives. Oh my God, human beings are beautiful. They have form, beautiful forms. You see what's going on? Michelangelo makes the statue of David sculpture, and he's like, oh my God, the human being is beautiful. I am a humanist. Raphael makes a painting called The School of Athens, showing all these philosophers that I was telling you about, Heraclitus and Parmenides and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. What is he glorifying? Not God. He's glorifying human beings. And he's glorifying them in their Greco-Roman form. Because back then, during classical Athens, you had basically the same thing going on. The Parthenon, right? People building the Parthenon in Athens. Great statesmen like Pericles that are kind of like the Medici family in Florence. You have amazing sculptors like Phidias. You have all sorts of musicians and poets. You have tragic literature and tragic dramas from Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. Guys, this is not idle information. I'm not trying to impress you. This is relevant because classical Athens was the environment in which Socrates and Plato and Aristotle grew up in, and it obviously influenced them. So, yes?
So classical is before the Renaissance or after the Renaissance?
Sorry, let me be clear. Classicism is a style of culture. A style of culture. There are different forms of classicism. The earliest form of classicism in the West is Greco-Roman classicism. First, in Athens, you have the development of classical taste in music, art, painting, sculpture. It's a very refined and noble and dignified taste that kind of restricts displays of excessive motion and excessive feeling and movement. and everything is very statuesque and very refined. You know what I mean? Classicism is one of the major styles of art and culture. It's usually contrasted with another big style. Do you know what the other big style that's contrasted with classicism is? Can you guess? It begins in the 1700s in France, and it has one big philosopher at its head. A philosopher, guys. Have you heard of a philosopher called Rousseau? Rousseau was a romantic, and the movement he started, arguably, is called what? Romanticism. Romanticism is the opposite of classicism in many ways. Classicism is very statuesque and refined and stately. Everything is harmonious and proportioned and measured and restrained. So what is romanticism if it's the opposite of that? Everything is what? Wild and free. You see that? You see that? That's a different aesthetic. That's a different way of enjoying your senses, by enjoying what's wild, free, destructive, exotic, ruins, things like that. Think of paintings that showed mountains, forests, Gothic cathedrals, that kind of thing. That's romanticism. Whereas if you want to see classicism, think of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo for the Renaissance, or for Greco-Roman classicism, just think of Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. Think of Plato's dialogues. Think of lyrical poets like Pindar and Horace. Think of epic poets like Homer and Hesiod. Are you guys getting the general idea? These are the environments that were shaping the minds and the values and the virtues of the philosopher we're about to talk about. Any questions? Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
So classicism originates in 500 years before Christ in Athens. And then it's transferred to the Roman Empire because the Roman Empire, first Alexander the Great conquered Greece, and then eventually the Roman Empire conquered Macedonia and Greece, and a lot of Greek values and Greek culture was transferred to the Roman Empire. And we have great movements like Stoicism and Epicureanism and Neoplatonism and some Platonism, and those are preserved in the Roman Empire until Constantine made Christianity the dominant religion, and then Theodosius outlawed all these pagan philosophies and made only one state religion, and eventually those philosophers died down. And during the Dark Ages, also known as the medieval period or the Middle Ages, the reason why it's called dark is because what? All those clergy in the First Estate, they were absorbed in Judeo-Christian values, right? They didn't preserve the philosophy and the Stoicism and the philosophy and the science and the geometry and all that stuff. They didn't care about it. They only cared about being monks, being nuns, just devoting themselves entirely to God. You see where I'm going? Now, the Renaissance is called the Renaissance because the classical period declines into the Dark Ages, and then Petrarch and others lead it out of the Dark Ages. And when they discover all this culture from ancient Greece and Rome, it's like, wow, there's a light after periods of darkness. And it's like a rebirth. And so we have a rebirth not of ancient classicism, but now we have Renaissance classicism and Renaissance humanism. The love of the humanities, the love of what's human from a secular perspective. So you can see why the church declined, right? And you can see how there are two classicisms. There was another classicism that came later. It's called neoclassicism. And that's kind of a reemergence of classicism after the Renaissance, about 200 years later, in the 1700s and 1800s. I'll let you do more research on that. Let's get into the meat of this now. So he lived during the classical age of Athens. I'm going to go fast now. Now you know his environment, right? You know what classical means. And he's surrounding himself with all these people who are kind of proud and kind of just living unconscious lives. addicted to money and power and politics and economics, all sorts of commercial activities. Athens is doing great. Athens is successful. You get it? Good economy, successful military conquests against Persia and Sparta. To everybody but Socrates, things are great, right? And so what does Socrates have to say? Now, for those of you who read it, tell me, what's Socrates' problem with this environment? Dímelo. What's going on? Think about that analog I was telling you about. What does Christ find wrong with his fellow Jews? Guys, you see how if you prepare things properly, I don't even have to do much. I set it up properly, and you've got a forgiven prophet here. So Socrates is on a mission because he thinks people aren't woke enough. You know that word woke? Woke culture. Yeah, he sees a bunch of unconscious people, zombies, using their bodies, addicted to power and money and sex and all this luxury that comes with a successful economy. And he's like, you guys are sloths. Yeah, you're a businessman and you work all the time, but you're a sloth. How can you make that charge? How can you make that accusation? How can you be a sloth and you work 70 hours a week? Anyone want to try a guess? Yep.
There's a difference in working on something bettering as a person and just working too much.
Bingo. Yes. Sloth is not necessarily staying in bed all day or playing video games or just, that. Or living in your parents' basement forever. No, it's not having any ambition. It's caring about the right things in the right way. Do you see that? What's the first commandment according to Christianity? The first thing you need to do, the number one priority. What object in the universe should absorb all your heart and all your mind and all your soul? God. So that first. And what's the second commandment? Who else needs all of your love and all your affection and all your empathy and all your care? Your mom and dad, your neighbors, your friends, your country, and yourself. So Jesus summarizes all that law in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, everything. And then second, he says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. We can use Jesus to understand Socrates a bit. You see what I'm saying? They're analogous. That means they're similar. Not in all respects, but in some fundamental respects. So Socrates is saying, look, guys, you're slothful because you don't care sufficiently about what's really important and what really matters. I don't care how busy you are or productive you think you are. I don't care about how much the economy is doing well, the stock market, victories against Persia and Sparta, yada, yada, yada. You're caring about the wrong things in the wrong way. Your priorities are off. What do you think Socrates thinks we should care about? Yeah. Absolutely. We should care about what's worth caring about. This body is going to die. It's the body that dies, but the soul lives on. So you need to, just like you absorb yourself with the most important thing in the world, God, yeah, you have an image. There's an image of God inside you called your soul. They're both equally metaphysical. So align yourself with what's most important. That's why Muslims pray 5 times a day. Not because Sharia law is oppressive. No, It's because you're just constantly distracted by family, by petty things, business, competition with your neighbor, keeping up with the Joneses, social media. You see what I'm saying? You need to constantly reconnect with what's important. It's not about 5 times. The number isn't really the issue. You see why that's arbitrary? Really, and ideally, it should be what? Not 5, but what? All of the time. That's why we have monks, right? So that they can just go ahead and say, you know what? I take a vow of, what are the 2 big vows? I take a vow of silence. I take a vow of celibacy. And I take a vow of what? Poverty. I take a vow of poverty. I won't own anything. I won't get distracted by material things. I vow not to talk and spread gossip and sensational stuff, to talk mindlessly, to get addicted to physical things mindlessly, to consume food mindlessly, and technology, sex mindlessly. Buddhism is all about being mindful. Be mindful. Don't get lost in addictions on social media. Don't get lost on listening to music for hours on YouTube. Don't get lost in listening to gossip all the time. Do you see how all religions fundamentally are one? Be mindful, be careful, care for your soul. There's many ways to get lost. Socrates looks around and he sees a bunch of robots, a bunch of zombies that are lost. They need to be woke. So Socrates is on a mission, and he's trying to wake up people by talking to them and philosophizing with them. Oh, you care about something? Hey, let's talk. You care about something. So if you care about something, I'm assuming you know what you care about. And that's where the problem begins, right? Because when you get philosophical, you help people realize that they care about things that they don't even know. They don't even understand. And they start to understand that they're lost. Plato features Socrates in almost all of his dialogues. And guess what, guys? In those dialogues, Socrates has encounters with different people. They start off friendly and chilling. Then they go through a bunch of philosophizing. And guess how the play ends? Guess how the dialogue always ends? With a bunch of people saying, boy, Socrates, you got me. I was going to take my father to court and prosecute him for murder, because I think murder is impious. But after talking to you, I realized that I'm a priest, and I was going to prosecute my own father for impiety and ungodliness. But after I talked to you, I realized that I don't even know what the definition of impiety is or piety is. I don't know what godliness is. So I'm confused. Here I am, this priest, and I can't even define what godliness is or piety or holiness. Man, I got to go rethink my life. I got to think a bit deeper about what I think I know and what I care about. You guys get the point? Jesus isn't doing this. I said they're analogous, but they're not the same. They're not identical. Jesus is not going around questioning people, trying to make them woke. Jesus is saying, look, I am the Son of God. No one gets to the Father but by me. That's Jesus. Have faith in me, and through faith you will be redeemed. Socrates is taking a philosophical approach. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. By the end of my series of questions, you're going to be woke, but you're not going to be woke because you know so much. You're only going to be woke because you realize how much you don't know. You get it? And that'll provoke you to be humbler and to focus on your soul more and focus on being as virtuous as possible and figuring out what virtue is and focusing on your soul and thinking about metaphysical things rather than all these physical things that aren't even going to matter. Christ said, what's the point of absorbing yourself in the world and losing your own soul in it, becoming lost or addicted to something that's going to distract you for the rest of your life? All right, Socrates gets in trouble. Do you think people like being criticized? No, he gets in trouble. People take him to court. He's charged with corrupting the youth, not believing the gods, and playing with arguments like a sophist, with sophistry. You take a weak argument and make it look strong, and you take a strong argument and make it look weak. You see, these accusations make him seem like a talker. He's just talking, yakking, corrupting youth. The aristocratic youth like Plato are listening to him instead of being productive, going to the gymnasium, working out, running the politics in the state. Now they're getting distracted. So Socrates, ironically, is getting accused for the exact opposite thing of what he's doing, right? He's getting accused of being a distraction and corrupting. Whereas his whole mission is precisely the opposite, to end the corruption. Kind of like Jesus, right? Get rid of the Pharisees. Get rid of the inertia. Get rid of the deadness and the unconsciousness. Wake up, people. That's what he's trying to do. All right, so he's in trouble. And people start saying, Socrates thinks he's wise. And Socrates says, yeah, I think I'm wise. But you know what? That's because a prophet, or rather a prophetess, known as the oracle, told me that I'm wise. She said Socrates is the wisest person in Athens. And I said, what? No, I don't know anything. Said Socrates is the wisest person. So after he recomposed himself, he said, I got to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to go to the most sophisticated and wise people I know, and I'm going to find out how the hell I'm the wisest person. And so he interacts with very sophisticated, very technically skilled people, politicians and craftsmen and poets. I'm not going to bore you with the details. I think you know what happens, right? He interacts with them. In these dialogues, you can see the interaction. People start off bold. I am a priest. I am a craftsman. I am a politician. They sound like they know what politics and craftsmanship and God or religion is. But by the time Socrates finishes messing with them and getting in their heads, they feel deflated. And that's embarrassing, right? You're a priest and you don't know what holiness is? You see the point, right? You get deflated. So Socrates is embarrassing people. And if you're pretending like you know, and then you're only revealing your true colors at the end of the discussion, what is that pretending called? There's a name for it. You're putting on a persona, a mask, and you're saying, oh, hey man, what's up? You're a pastor, you're a priest? All right, hey, you must know a lot about holiness. All right, tell me all about it, man. Can you define it for me? No. I don't want an example of it. I want the definition of it. I want a standard that has all the necessary sufficient conditions for being pious and being holy, so that I can use that standard to identify any instances or any examples universally at any time or place. So please, help me out, brother. You're the expert, man. You're the priest. Help me out. By the time that dialogue is over, one of those people is trembling, and it's not Socrates. Do you see what the name of that is? What was he doing? He was being what? There's a name for it. It's called being ironic. You've heard that word? Irony? So someone pretends like they don't know, but they do know. What is he pretending? He starts off interacting with you. He pretends like he doesn't know that you're ignorant. He plays along. But he lets you realize your own ignorance later. And now you feel like a fool because you realize this guy from the beginning he was convinced that you didn't know anything. Do you see that? And irony adds a sting to the embarrassment. Do you see that? Because now you feel like someone was playing with you. Do you see that? Does that make sense? Any questions? Any questions at all? This is important, guys, because we can accelerate much faster if you understand these basic ideas. Acceleration is no problem. Don't worry about that. Even if it goes into next week, it's okay. We can catch up. But I want fundamentals to be branded into you, branded into your soul, so that you'll never forget. What time is it? 7:41. We've got 9 minutes. Yeah. We're gonna focus on Socrates. We're not doing anything else. Don't worry. Go ahead.
It's like, what was the main fundamental like Socrates?
Sorry, what?
What you said is like the main fundamental like Socrates.
You mean his mission and function and vocation, or what?
Like, is it that was to like question people like get them to realize that they don't know. That was it.
Yeah, he's trying to wake them up. But wake them up to the fact that they're ignorant and lost and distracted and mediocre and addicted. So he uses things like empty glory, uses distractions like economics and politics and military interests. So he wants to wake them up, but kind of like Jesus. Jesus is not a Messiah who's going to go and fight Caesar and take the Jews and liberate them from the yoke of the Roman Empire. He's not interested in that. He wants your soul to be liberated. You see that? So same way, Socrates is not really interested in your ability to beat Persia or Sparta or have a great economy or whatever. He wants you to be as virtuous as possible, but virtue means ethical virtue, moral virtue. Does that make sense? But don't worry, guys. That other stuff we'll get to. If you understand fundamentals, you'll see all of that stuff will be relevant later. We can go through 3 of those in one class if you want. But this is like a sermon. You know what a sermon is? A sermon also is an attempt to make people woke. Some of my favorite sermons come from like people like Joel Osteen. You know Joel Osteen? You know Joyce Meyer? Very like down-to-earth people who are just helping you to enjoy everyday life and see Christ's glory in everyday life. It's fantastic stuff, man. The only danger is exclusivity and saying either this church or this religion is the only place where you can find salvation. That's where philosophy comes in and kind of corrects that narrow-mindedness by being open-minded. See that? All right. So, he's telling people, you are not truly wise. You think you're wise just because you have an expertise or you're technically very savvy, you know. You think you know stuff. You only know you're a carpenter. How do you know about politics and all this other stuff and you're a carpenter? Yeah, you know about carpentry. But do you know about virtue? Can you tell me what that is? Yeah, maybe you're virtuous at breeding horses or carpentry or building statues. Okay, I got it. But do you know what virtue is? And do you know which virtues are more important than other virtues? Right? Which virtues should you be practicing daily? Is it the virtue of computer programming and being an influencer on Instagram? Or is it the virtue of being faithful and hopeful and loving? Which of those is more important? If you get a definition of virtue and rank the virtues, you'll become more woke. So he's saying, you are not truly wise, and neither am I. Although I, at least, am conscious of my lack of a definition of things, like virtue and wisdom. And so, I am kind of the wisest person, ironically, right? Because at least I'm conscious and woke enough to realize that I don't know anything. Neither do you, but at least I know that I don't know. So that Socrates is taken to trial, they condemn him to death. And during the trial, he says something amazing. He says, the unexamined life is not worth living. He says, the unexamined life is not worth living. This is axiology and existentialism. The meaning of life, the value of life. If you don't examine your life, you're not going to be woke. You're going to be unconscious your whole life. Addicted to sex and drugs and economics and politics. And that's an unconscious life. And it's like like living the life of an animal or a plant, or maybe even worse, like this matter. Was that really worth it? You weren't even woke the whole time. You were asleep your whole life. So he calls himself in the trial a spiritual gadfly. He's a gadfly because he's annoying the hell and irritating the cow in front of him. The cow is the people. And he's stinging the hell out of them to wake up. Wake up. Stop sleeping. Wake. Wake up. Now, he's not answering all their questions, right? He's not concluding anything, and he's not telling them, this is what you need to believe, this is the way. He's just saying, think for yourself, think critically, and become more woke. As you go through your life, and you're doing certain actions and feeling certain feelings, be very conscious of what those things are. You get it? Just be very aware. And this is where it sounds like Buddhism. The Buddha is constantly all about mindfulness. Be woke. Be mindful of how you're talking about other people. Be mindful of your anger and your temper. Be mindful of the effect you have on other people. Be mindful of what you're doing to the environment. Do you see that? We have 3 minutes. Socrates was one of the first people in history to say, look, I don't care if you're going to throw me in jail, and I don't care if you're going to kill me. I'm not following men. I'm going to follow who? Who do you think he invoked? God. I'm going to follow God. Yes, the Athenians were religious. It's not the Yahweh or it's not Yahweh or the Christian God, but he says, look, I have a vocation, a calling. Socrates had this spirit that he said would speak to him. It's called his daemon. And it would speak to him by telling him what not to do. It wouldn't really tell him what to do, but it was like his conscience. He'd say, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. So Socrates was having religious experiences, and he invoked God. He said, look, you guys want me to conform and stop talking to people and stop talking to the youth. God called me to talk to people, and I'm going to follow God, and I'm not going to follow you. So they condemned him to death. And back in those days, how you die is you consume some poison, and you slowly die. And that's what happened to Socrates. He consumed poison, surrounded by his disciples. His disciples were angry and sad and telling him to break out of jail. Come on, I'll liberate you. I'll rescue you. He said, no, I got to follow the law. It's unethical to break the law. And he said, stop crying, because you know what? I am not my body. I am what? So don't weep over me, because I'm going to be just fine. There's an entire dialogue called the Phaedo, where he gives arguments while he's about to drink the poison about the fact that he has a soul and it's immortal. Here's some reasons why it's immortal. So don't cry over me. I'll be just fine. And so basically, guys, what are we looking at when we look at Socrates? When we use this word hero, a hero, or a saint, or a martyr, in what context do we usually use those words? Let's use the word hero. In what context, what branch of society do we typically say we have heroes? Come on. What branch of society? Yeah. Yep. Policemen. Yeah, people who save others or save their country. And who saves the country during a war? Military, soldiers. So I want to suggest to you guys that Socrates, his mission to make people more woke and more conscious was actually successful. You know why? He died, but he left a legacy. Being more conscious, being more woke, spread throughout Greece, and it created different schools of thought: the skeptics, the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Cynics, the academics, the Platonists, the Peripatetics. All of them were heavily influenced by Socrates as a model of someone who was not afraid of death and who believed in the immortality of the soul. So we have the birth of a new kind of hero, a new kind of saint, and a new kind of martyr. We typically think of these things in Christian contexts or military contexts, but I suggest to you that he made a new kind of hero in the philosophical context. Guys, thank you so much for paying attention. I love how you pay attention to me. That's why I don't care if you have electronics, because you are absorbed in what I'm saying, and that's so respectful. It's not just more than respectful. It's like fellowship, honestly. So I'm going to stop it here, and then I'm going to take attendance, and then I'll take any questions you have, and then we can move on.